So in this next installment on quadratic equations, we'll be looking and focusing on how to solve a quadratic equation using the quadratic formula. Now, using the quadratic formula is a way of solving a quadratic equation, or at least identifying whether or not it can be solved. Now, the biggest clue on using this method to solve a quadratic is when you are asked to round your possible answers to or solutions to a certain number of decimal places or significant figures. And like I said, this will usually appear on a calculator paper. There has been rare incidents where it has appeared on a non-calculator paper, but usually if a question asks you to round your answers to a degree of accuracy in terms of rounding, then it's definitely going to be encouraging you to use the quadratic formula. Now, the quadratic formula looks like this. Now, the key aspects of this particular formula is the top line. Now, when you are working or when using the quadratic formula to solve a quadratic equation, you need to make sure that it's first of all equal to 0. It must be equal to 0. So again, most questions will already be equal to 0, but if it isn't, then you're going to need to rearrange the formula so that it is. Now, the actual quadratic formula itself seems to be quite confusing, quite complex. So let me just break down what each of the components actually are. Now, all of a sudden, from having an equation that's got just x's or whatever letter it is, we've now got this ABC values. Now, the ABC values are the number of x squareds, number of x's we've got, and the constant, or basically the number that hasn't got a letter. And that's basically what it is. So here, now obviously I'm solving this equation with respect to x, so this is where we've got x's, not any other letter. So here we've got a's. So a is the number of x squareds that we've got, and that would be this number here. Then if I get a different highlighter, it lets me, yeah, it does. So if I look at the b value, which is basically how many x's I've got in the question, then that's basically what these two values here are going to be. And the c value is basically what number have you got that hasn't got a letter attached to it, and that would be where that number there goes. Now, in terms of breaking down the actual formula, now, the key issue where a lot of students, when they've seen this formula for the first time, is thinking, what on earth is this symbol here? Now, this symbol here is, as we've talked about, when solving a quadratic equation, you're typically going to have two solutions. Now, for one solution, we use the plus, and for the other solution, use the minus. So that's where we get our two values, and rather than writing down the quadratic formula twice, all they've done is just combine the two things together. Now, the other thing that tends to be quite confusing is this 4ac part. Now, 4ac is basically 4 times a times c, and likewise with the 2a, that's just basically 2 times a, and b squared is just b squared, which is b times b. Now, the key, another area that a lot of students tend to mess up on is this minus b. Now, this will always be minus b, never just b, just minus b. Now, again, so what we need to do is pick out the values from each of these values to find out what a, b, and c are actually going to be from the original equation. So, for example, if I had 4x squared, let's just make use of the full range of colours, plus let's say 6x plus minus 8 equals 0. Now, because it equals 0, that's where I can then read off the numbers. So here, a is going to equal 4, b is going to equal 6, and c is going to equal minus 8. And that's how I can read the numbers off, typically from a quadratic equation. So let's just quickly run through the method of how we actually solve a quadratic equation using the quadratic formula. Now, I'd probably recommend making a note of these, and if any of these steps do not make any sense, then hopefully they will do when we go through some examples, and we will go through quite a few. So as I mentioned, the very first important thing that a lot of students tend to mess up on is this first rule, which is make sure that the equation is equal to 0. So whenever you're solving any quadratic equation, regardless of what method you're going to use, you have to make sure it's equal to 0. The next thing we then need to do is write down the ABC values from the equation. Next, it's really good practice for you to write down the formula. Now, you won't get any marks for writing down the quadratic formula, but it certainly will help you remember the formula because you won't be given to it in the exam. And the more you write it, the more instinctive it will become of you remembering it. And again, at first glance, it might seem like a really complicated formula, but once you've written it about a couple of times, you think, right, actually, this is not that bad. Step 4 is then you substitute the ABC values into the formula. Now, the fifth step is what a lot of people don't do, and this is, if you're going to go wrong, then this usually is the instance of where it happens. Now, if I just write down, so what it says, step 5 says simplify the numbers inside the square root and the 2a. Now, basically what this means is, if I just write down what the quadratic formula actually is, this here. Now, what step 5 is telling you to do is, without using a calculator, see if you can simplify this expression that's inside the square root and simplify the 2a. And again, I'll go through what I mean by that if that makes absolutely no sense. Step 6 is probably where I encourage you to use your calculator, and what you then do is substitute the numbers in as you can, that you've written down in the exact same form, and type into your calculator. And then for one solution, use a plus, and for another solution, use a minus. And again, does make sense. I'll go through in the examples. And then the 7th step is then round your answers as requested in the question if specified. Now, if the question doesn't say round your answer up to 2 decimal places, 3 decimal places, and again, more often it will do, then all you need to do is just write down 2 dp yourself or 3 sf, depending on what you've used, and then that will be absolutely fine. But again, this is a really, really important step, is make sure that you are rounding your answers and you do check with the question on how they want your answers and what they want it rounded to. So let's have a look at step 2. Now, this is where you're reading the values of A, B, C, and this is typically where you would get your first marks from. Now, typically you get your first mark if your equation's not equal to 0, so you need to make it equal to 0 first. But if your equation is equal to 0, then it's just a case of writing down these A, B, C values. Now, if I use an appropriate color highlighter for this, so let's have a look if that you can still see it. Yeah. So for A, what we're looking at is the number of x squareds that we can see in each of these 3 questions. Now I'll try and use the same color. Now, as you can see, the first thing we need to do is make sure it's equal to 0. So this first one is equal to 0, so that's fine. The second one is equal to 0, that's fine. And the third one is equal to 0, so again, that is absolutely fine. So the A value is how many x squareds we see. So for the first one, we can see that we've got 1x squared. Now, although a 0, that wasn't meant to be a 0, so let me just get rid of that. So it's asking you how many x squareds have we got? Well, in this question, we've got 1x squared. In the second one, we've got minus 2x squareds. And in the third example, we've got 8x squareds. Now for B, which is using green, so it's asking for how many x's have we got. So let me just write that down. So A is how many x squareds. B is how many x's. And the C is how many just numbers have you got. That doesn't really quite make much sense in terms of English, but hopefully it kind of makes a bit of sense with regards to what we're doing. So for this one here, we've got positive 3x, so I'm going to write plus 3. For this one, I've got minus 3. And for question C, I've got nothing with x's, so that's just a 0. And then moving on to the constant, or C. Now, constant is just basically a number, the number at the end. So here I've got minus 1. With this, I've got positive 6, and with C, 3, I've got minus 7. And so all I've done there is identified my A, B, C values, and then from this I can then use a quadratic formula to work it in. Now this is, like I mentioned, it's a very important step, and just writing down these numbers would get you your first couple of marks in this particular section. So let's have a look at some example questions. So Again, I'll try and do each of these in a separate colour, and I'll try and follow the 7 steps that we've got. So the first thing you want to do is the equation equal to 0? Yes, it is. So the next thing I then need to do is work out what my A, B, C values are. So for question 1, I've got A equals 4, B equals 9, and C equals 1. Now I've got positive, each of those values are positive because I've got pluses all the way through, so I don't really need to write plus. It might get a little bit confusing otherwise. Only basically specify if they're negative. So the next thing I've got to do then is write down the formula. So I've got x equals minus b plus minus 4ac. Oh no, I haven't. Good start. So I've got b squared minus 4ac all divided by 2a. And all I'm going to do now is substitute those numbers into this formula. So I've got x equals, now it's minus b, so it'd be minus 9 plus minus square root of 9 squared minus, and now here what I'd always recommend is putting that in brackets. So I've got 4 times a, which is 4, times c, which is 1, and that's all being divided by 2 times 4. Now, as I mentioned, what I would strongly recommend that you do is, if you can, is to simplify the things that are inside the square root. So what I'm going to do is I'm now going to simplify all of this. So again, what I've got is I've got minus 9 plus minus. I'm leaving that. So I've got 81, which is 9 squared, minus, and then 4 times 4 is 16, times 1, which is 16. And that's all being divided by 2 times 4, which is 8. I'm going to scroll across, so here I've got minus 9, and again I can do plus minus, and then 81 take away 16, so 81 minus 16 is 65, and that's being square rooted, and that's being divided by 8. Now this is what I'm going to type into my calculator. So this is the actual answer. So for this, what I need to then do is, if I get my calculator, and let me just load it up, and here we go. So on my calculator, what I'm going to do is enter this. Now for one solution, I'm going to write a plus. So for one, I'm going to write minus 9 plus root 65 over 8 equals, and then for the other answer, I'm going to write minus 9 minus root 65 all divided by 8, and then write down those two answers. And again, making sure that rounding up to 2 decimal places. So getting my calculator out, I'm going to press the fraction button. I've got minus 9, so again, remembering not to use the subtraction button, plus square root of 65, and then scroll down, and then 8, and then press equals, and press the SD button. So one answer, 2 decimal places, is minus 0.12. So minus 0.12 is one possible answer. Now for the second equation, now if I've already got this typed up, then all I need to do is scroll across. I could type it in again, or I could just do this. Swap the plus with a minus, press equals, and it comes up with an answer of minus 2.13. So minus 2.13. And there are my 2 possible answers, rounded to 2 decimal places. Then moving on to question 2. So again, just completely rub all of this out. I might regret choosing to do 4 examples, but I'll talk you through it. So we'll do this one in blue. So with question 2, I'm going to have a, it is equal to 0, so I've got a equals number of x squared, which is 1, b is the number of x's, which is minus 8, and c is the number at the end, which is plus 1. So from this, what I'm now going to do is substitute into the formula now. I don't know why I keep writing that out, so let me just leave it on the screen. And let me just get rid of that random equal sign. And so now all I'm going to do is substitute these numbers into the quadratic formula. So what I'm going to have is x equals, and it's going to be now minus 8, because obviously the minus is part of the formula, plus minus, then I've got minus 8, which I'm going to write in squared bracket, minus bracket 4 times 1 times 1, and and that's all being divided by 2 times 1. So then all I'm then going to do is now simplify, well, let's simplify this. Now 2 minuses make a plus, so that's going to be positive 8 plus minus, and now I'm going to simplify this square root. Now the reason why I'm writing minus 8 in brackets is because it's being squared. Now minus 8 times minus 8 is going to give me positive 64 minus 4 times 1, which is 4. And that's all being divided by 2 times 1, which is 2. Now if I simplify that, I get 8 plus minus 60 divided by 2. And again, now this is where I then enter this into my calculator. So again, one answer is where I'm typing in 8 plus root 60 over 2. And the other answer I'm going to do 8 minus root 60 over 2. So again, I'm going to get my calculator out. Let's clear the previous question. So here I've got 8 plus root 60 over 2 equals, and that's going to give me an answer of 7.87. And then again, I could have a choice of either typing this in again, or I could just scroll across and just change that plus to a minus, press equals, press the SD button, and I get minus 0.13. And there is my final answer. Now if your rounding's a bit shoddy, then I'd recommend you write down everything that's in the on the calculator, and if as long as it's correct, you won't, the most you'll lose is 1 mark for not rounding your answers, but generally speaking, that's what we need to do. So let's have a look at moving on to question 3. So again, just quickly get rid of all of this. So moving on to question 3, I need to write that first of all, is it equal to 0? Yes, it is. So I need to write my ABC value. So A is going to be 7, B is going to be 3, and C is minus 2. So substituting numbers into the formula, I'm going to have minus 3 plus minus the square root of 3 squared minus bracket 4 times 7 times minus 2. And that's all being divided by 2 times 7. So then simplifying this, I've got minus 3 plus minus. Now square of 3 is 9, minus, and then 4 times 7 is 28, times minus 2, which is minus 56, all divided by 14. Now here I need to be careful of these two minuses, because that then becomes a plus. So then what that then becomes is minus 3 plus or minus 9 plus 56, all divided by 14, which gives me an answer of minus 3 plus minus 65, all divided by 14. Now again, from once I've got it into this form, I then need to type it into my answer, into my calculator rather. So I've got x equals minus 3 plus root 65 over 14 equals, and I've got minus 3 minus root 65 over 14 equals. And so go straight into my calculator, type that in. So let's just clear that. So I've got minus 3 plus root 65 over 14, press equals, press SD, and I get my 0.36. And then for the second equation, again, you can either type it in. Now, if you do end up with brackets, some calculators, you need to write brackets inside the square root, and that's absolutely fine. Just make sure you close it and that second bracket is inside the square root. And then just change that plus to a minus, press equals, and I get an answer of minus 0.79. And there are my two answers. And then moving swiftly on to question 4. And like I said, more difficult questions will involve negative numbers, but the method is exactly the same. You just need to take that extra bit of care working through these questions. And again, this is one of the reasons why it's classed as higher level. So what colour? We're not just go for purple. So in question 4, we've got A equals 3, B equals minus 4, and C equals minus 5. So we've got a lot more negatives in this particular question. So I've got x equals minus 4 plus minus square root of minus 4 squared minus 4 times 3 times minus 5. That's all being square rooted, all divided by 2 times 3. So simplifying the bits that I can, well, I've got two minuses, that becomes a positive, so it's plus 4, plus or minus. Minus 4 squared is 16, and then I've got minus 4 times 3, which is 12, times minus 5, which is minus 60, all divided by 6. Now simplifying this, I get 4 plus minus, and then two minuses become a plus, so I've got 76 divided by 6. Now the key thing to note in this is that you should always end up with a positive number inside the square root. If you come out with a syntax error or math error when you're substituting this into your calculator, just be wary that the number inside the square root has to be positive. If it comes out negative, then there's a good chance you may have made a mistake, or the fact that the equation can't be solved, and that'll be a reason for you doing that. If you were to end up with a negative and you've done everything correctly, then a question might ask you is to show why there is no solutions to this particular question. And that reason is because you can't square root a negative number. So again, it's a very common question that you might get asked on as to why you cannot solve a quadratic equation. Now, once I've done that, the next thing I then got to do is put it all into my calculator. So for one answer, I've got 4 plus root 76 over 6. And the other answer is 4 minus root 76 over 6. And again, I'm just going to just type that all into my calculator. And let's just move it to the side. So I've got 4 plus root 76 over 6 equals, and I've got 2.12. There's one answer, and then getting the calculator back, I'm going to kind of scroll across. Again, like I said, you can type it all in, it's entirely up to you. Equals, and I've got minus, oh, I forgot what number that was, 0.79, and there are my two solutions. Now, again, you could easily go straight from this to working out the answers. You don't feel the need to have to write out the two separate sections here. It's more of a case of just an indication of what you've got to type into your calculator, but it's entirely up to you. If you've got time to set it out like this, brilliant. Now, you could, in theory, go type in all of this into your calculator, but you just need to be careful of negatives and knowing the difference between minuses and minuses, and brackets. And I reckon the more you do in your head, the better it's going to be, but obviously making sure that the work that you are doing in your head is correct. Now, these next four examples aren't as straightforward as the previous ones, and there's little things that we kind of need to be aware of. Now, with question 5, so let's just pick a colour to do with this one. So let's go for whatever colour this is, pink. So for this, what we need to look at is the fact that, is it equal to 0? Yes, but this one, what we've got is, unlike all the previous ones, that here we've got a negative x squared. So it's going to be minus, a is going to be equal minus 1, b is going to be equal to 5, and c is going to be equal to minus 1. And again, it's just a case of the fact that these three are not written in the typical order that we would expect, and something that you just need to be aware of. So a typical mistake what they would write is a equals 5, b equals 1, and c equals 1, minus 1 rather. And again, although that's correct for C, it's not going to be correct for the other two variables. So just be wary that A is the number of x squared you've got, B is the number of x's you've got, and C is the number at the end. So the next thing we then need to move on to is then using these values to substitute into the formula. Now again, although I've got it off the screen, so let me just quickly write down the formula. And again, I would always recommend that you put brackets around the b squared, and it's not great brackets, so we're using yellow, and around the 4ac. So from this, what we then got is, with question 5, I'm going to substitute straight into there. So I've got minus 5 plus minus, and it's going to be 5 squared minus 4 times minus 1 times minus 1. Again, just putting that in brackets, that's all being square rooted, all divided by 2 times minus 1. So simplifying this, I get minus 5 plus minus, and then 5 squared is 25, minus 4 times minus 1 is minus 4, times minus 1 gives me positive 4. And that's all being divided by 2 times minus 1, which is minus 2. Then simplifying that inside the square root, I get minus 5 plus minus 21 over minus 2. So then looking at my two answers, I've got one answer where I've got minus 5 plus root 21 over minus 2, and the other answer where I've got minus 5 minus square root 21 over minus 2. So lots of negatives to be wary about. So again, if I get my calculator out and enter it exactly how I've written it down, so I've got minus 5 plus square root of 21 over minus 2. And again, making sure that whenever you're dealing with a negative number, I'm using the negative button just underneath the fraction button. And obviously just making sure that there's no brackets inside square root. If there were brackets, just make sure you close them. Otherwise you might come up with a syntax error or math error on your calculator. Press equals, and we get an answer of minus 0.21. Then working out the second answer, all I need to do there is scroll across. Oh, let me just get rid of that. Is scroll across and change that plus to a minus. Try not to go crazy with the arrow keys like we have done there. Equals, press the SD button, and we get 4.79. And there are my two final answers. And then moving on to question 6. So again, let's just get rid of all of this. So with question 6, now you can see here that this is not equal to 0. So I've got 2x squared minus 2x equals 7x. So I need to take the 7x over to the side, and I need to do that by taking away. So what I've got is 2x squared minus 9x equals 0. So here A is the number of x squareds I've got, which is 2. B is the number of x's I've got, which is minus 9. And C, well, I haven't got a number, so it's just 0. So these are the values that I'm going to be substituting in. So from this then, I've got minus 9 plus minus 9 squared minus 4 times 2 times 0. And that's all being divided by 2 times 2. So simplifying this, I get minus 9, which is positive 9, plus minus 9 squared is 81, and 4 times 2 times 0 is just 0. And 2 times 2 is 4. So simplifying this, I get 9 plus minus root 81 over 4. Now from this, we talked about this being a calculator question only, but I could do this without using a calculator. So here I know that the square root of 81 equals 9. So one possible answer is going to be 9 plus or minus 9 over 4. So one answer will be 9 plus 9 divided by 4, which is 18 over 4. And the other answer is going to be 9 minus 9 divided by 4, which is going to give me 0. And there are my two possible answers. So that's going to be 9 over 2 and 0. Now again, if I type this into my calculator, I should get the exact same answers. So let's just double check. So I've got 9 plus root 81 over 4 equals, and I get 4.5. Or, and again, just checking on the calculator, change that to a minus, and it gives me 0. So that was absolutely spot on. And there you go. Moving on to question 8. Now again, with question 8 here, we've got a bracket. So again, we need to get rid of any brackets because we need to get it in the form of something x squared plus or minus something x plus or minus a number equals 0. So looking at this then, and again to make sure I've got a clear screen, there we have, and let's go for green this time. So we've got 2x plus 5 equals 10. So again, let's multiply the brackets. So I get 2x squared plus 5x equals 10. And then you take the 10 over to the side by subtracting 10. So here I end up with 2x squared plus 5x minus 10 equals 0. So from this, a equals 2, b equals 5, and c is going to equal minus 10. So then substituting numbers into the quadratic formula, I've got minus 5 plus minus square root of 5 squared minus 4 times 2 times minus 10, all divided by 2 times 2. So simplifying that, get minus 5 plus minus square root of 25 minus 4 times 2, which is 8, times 10, which is minus 80, all divided by 2 times 2, which is 4. Then simplifying that, get minus 5 plus or minus. Now 2 minuses become a plus, so that's going to be 105, all divided by 4. Now again, if you're struggling to do any of this in your head, you can go straight by typing all of this into your calculator and you'll still end up coming with this. The only difference is that this plus minus sign, which I'm just going to highlight there, you just need to swap that for a plus or a minus, and there you go. So going back to this question then, so one answer is going to be minus 5 plus root 105 over 4, or the other answer is going to be minus 5 minus square root of 105 over 4. And again, I'm going to type that into my calculator now. So we've got minus 5 plus root 105 over 4 equals, and I get 1.31. And then to find the second solution, I'm just going to swap that plus for a minus, and I get minus 3.81. And there is my final answer. And then finally, moving on to the last example. This is the last example. And here we're looking at something that could potentially already be a quadratic. So as we've said, we don't want any brackets when we're doing this substitution. So let's just go for red on this one. So I've got x minus 1 squared equals 17. So if I expand this out, the key thing to note is that x minus 1 squared is x minus 1, x minus 1. It's not just going to be simply x squared minus 1 squared. It's actually going to be two brackets. So expanding this out, I get x squared minus 1x minus 1x plus 1, which leaves me with x squared minus 2x plus 1. Now, the key thing that a lot of people tend to forget is that this all equals 17, because we've got this equals 17. So what I need to do is take the 17 over to the side by subtracting 17. So what I've then got as my final equation is x squared minus 2x minus 16 equals 0. Now from this, I've got that a is 1, b is going to be minus 2, and c is going to be minus 16. And then from this, I can then substitute this all into the formula. So I've got minus 2 plus minus 2 squared minus 4 times 1 times minus 16, all divided by 2 times 1. Then simplifying that, 2 minuses become a plus, plus minus 2 squared is 4, minus 4 times 1, which is 4, times minus 16 is minus 64 rather. All divided by 2 times 1, which is 2. Then simplifying this, I get 2 plus minus, and it's going to be 4 minus 64, which is 68, all divided by 2. And then from this, I can go straight into using the calculator. So one answer is 2 plus root 68 over 2, and the other answer is 2 minus root 68 over 2. And again, I can type that into my calculator to work this out. So I've got 2 plus root 68 and over 2, and that gives me an answer of 5.12. And for the other solution, can take that to a takeaway, press SD, and I get minus 3.12. And there is my second answer. Now, if you have got one of these Casio FX991 calculator, then it does have the quadratic formula actually plugged in. So if you go to the menu screen and then go to equation, so option A, press equals, then go to polynomial, then go to degree as 2 because your highest power of x is 2. Now here you can enter your ABC values. So if I enter my ABC values, which is 1, B is minus 2, and C is minus 16, press equals, press enter, and you can see that it will give you your two answers. So the first answer was 5.12, and if I press equals again, it gives you my second answer, which is minus 3.12. So if you have got access to this calculator, you can actually use your calculator, but I still strongly would recommend that you do show working out. So I would go as far as, for this particular question, I would go as far as the fact that you've expanded the brackets and made it equal to 0, because that'd be worth about 2 marks. You'll get a mark for working out the correct ABC values, 1 mark for substituting it into the quadratic formula, 1 mark for getting the correct answer, and then 1 mark for rounding up your answers to the to 2 decimal places or whatever you're wanting to round it up to. Now, we'll put some practice questions in the description below for you to check your understanding, and obviously the answers will be attached, but you can always use your calculator to work it out, or there are plenty of quadratic solvers online. We need to just Google quadratic formula solver and something will come up for you to check your possible answers. Now, also what I'll include in the description below is a link to this Excel spreadsheet, which basically gives a quadratic solver that I mentioned in the video. Now, for this, all you need to do is enter your A values in the red square, enter your B value in the green square, and your C value in the blue square. So for example, if I had 4x squared minus 3x minus 1, press enter, then I've got the solutions of 1.00 and minus 0.25 as the possible answers to 2 decimal places.